Episode 148, How to Identify Trauma in Your Black and White Thinking with Cami Birdo.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and a highly trained, experienced life coach making a great impact in the lives of their clients. And together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with the coach? Here we go.
It is natural for the brain to think in black and white. There is good and there is bad. On the surface, it makes situations seem easy to navigate, but when our thinking and reality don't line up, it can create a trauma response within our nervous systems. Coach Cami Birdo is on the podcast today talking about how to identify trauma induced by black and white thinking, and where we see it in our religion, parenting, and dealing within society. The good news is that healing can take place, and black and white thinking can be replaced with an abundance of curiosity, which ultimately leads to more love for ourselves and others. All of us have experienced trauma of some sort, so this episode is for everyone. And if you are ready to heal from your trauma, please reach out to Cami. She is ready to help you and is an amazing resource. Please enjoy.
Hey everyone, welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where I get to have a great conversation with amazing coaches. And today I'm joined by Coach Cami Birdo. Hey, Cami.
Hey, how are you?
Fantastic. Cami has been on recently, and I am actually really excited about this. It's not necessarily a follow-up conversation, but I think it all fits together. So with just different things that we've talked about. So anyway, I will have Cami introduce herself again, even though it hasn't been too long, but just in case you're listening to this and hadn't listened to the other ones, Cami, let us know a little bit about you.
Yeah. So first off, just thank you so much. I love being able to do this. I love being able to talk with Meg beforehand. I don't know how much people know about this, but we get to talk before, and it's so fun to just get feedback and insight about the different things that we're discussing, and then to talk with you. I just love the whole way you set it up. It's so fun. But thank you.
Well,
it's
thank
great.
you. And Meg is fantastic. She's our podcast producer, and she meets with the coaches beforehand.
She's amazing.
She lines it all out and makes my job super easy. So
yeah, she does a great job. It's fun. I love talking to her. But yeah, so I am Cami Birdo. I am a trauma-informed embodiment coach. And what that means is that I help women to come back to their bodies after trauma. So in trauma, it's very normal to either run away from your body and dissociate, or to be in this hypervigilant state that's just always constantly aware, but never really feeling at home in your body. And so we do that by starting to figure out what is actually going on in your body. Are you in a constant state of flee or fight or freeze or fawn? What does that look like? And how can we release some of that? What does it look and feel like to actually be in your body? And then what are new things to believe and how to feel, and new behaviors? And how do we now embody that, and to be able to really have that be the new person that we want to be, instead of being run by this trauma all the time? So that is what I do with my clients.
Love it. I'm wondering if you can, for some people listening, they might be, well, I think that probably sounds like me, but I can't imagine it being any different. So I'm just going to live with it the way that it is. Tell us why, what is good? Why would we want to put forth the effort of learning how to come back to our body?
Yeah. So there's this element of just feeling so out of control, right? Of that your body is just running the show, of something will happen and you feel oh my goodness, I just totally overreacted, or I totally underreacted. Why didn't I do something or say something? Or why did I act that way? That was crazy, right? And just feeling again, this craziness. And lots of times it does kind of come from, we have to get to a point where, because we think we're pretending, we think that we're fine and that nobody will really notice. We feel this way inside, but nobody really notices. And it does, I have found for most of my clients, have to come to, either they come to a point where they're just I am done. I am not acting like this anymore. I don't like being this person. Or lots of times it's mirrored to us in our relationships, meaning our family, lots of times it's kids who are Mom, you scare me. or like, I don't feel like I can talk to you, or even our husbands of like, I feel so disconnected. And, we kind of have these moments of like, oh, I can't keep pretending this way and I can't keep living this way. And finally being able to just say like, I'm done. Like, or even being able to say like, I feel like I'm missing a part of me. Right. So we kind of do have to have these moments of just like, I'm done with however I'm living my life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And I think that will be helpful for people who are listening to even just hear those examples, because I think that we oftentimes we can relate a little bit, but we don't necessarily understand, well, why is this a problem? What could be better for me if I actually put forth the effort, time to do this? So thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So today we are talking about trauma. Obviously that's like your area of expertise. But we want to talk a little bit about the trauma that can come from black and white thinking. And before we get into that, I wonder if two things. At first, you can tell us how you define trauma. And second, what black and white thinking is to you. And if you could maybe give us some more examples, kind of like the examples you just gave us. But anyway.
Yeah, so for sure. Yeah. So trauma, again, it can be tricky because like what's traumatic for me might not necessarily be traumatic for you. Right. And so just starting to understand that like each person's experience is different. And that is what makes it traumatic, is like all the experiences that we've had beforehand. And then we're in an experience, something happens, somebody says something, and then we respond in a way of our nervous system comes online, because our nervous system comes online when it's trying to keep us safe. And that's a good thing when we need it. Right. And then how we know when it is then trauma is then when we can't get out of our nervous system, when our nervous system is just staying online. And it might like be dampened a little bit. Like say, for instance, you have this freeze response that comes on and like something happened and you froze. You weren't able to do anything, even though you wanted to, you just froze. Or you fought like crazy and you're like, why did I respond like that? Like either physically fighting or verbally fighting, or you just like ran away from something. You're like, that's not normally something that I do. But you're able to kind of dampen it a little bit. And then something will happen that will remind you of that instance. And immediately you go back into that freeze, or immediately you go into the fight or the fawn or the flee. And there's no like downtime to assess, like, does this need to come online? Do I really need this? Like our nervous system doesn't even have a chance to decide if we need to come online, because it's always still been there underneath the surface. And so it just immediately takes over. And so those are kind of when we know that we have had some trauma going on, and that it's just back up with this trigger. And so then like when you think about like black and white thinking, because if you think about in trauma just in general, it is kind of a black or white thing, right? Like our nervous system comes on, it knows what to do. It does this one thing, knowing that that other thing will not keep us safe. Like we can't fight and flee at the same time, right? It has to be all or nothing. You can't freeze and run away at the same time, right? So like our nervous system just in general is a black and white response. And that's good when it's helpful and needed. But when we are constantly, so like some of the black and white thinking that could be a trauma response, and I'm not saying this always is, the way that you know is like what comes up in your body. Does it feel a little bit out of control? Does it feel like these sensations in my body just arise, are just there, or they're constantly there and I want to get rid of them? That's kind of how you know when trauma is just constantly there. But it's again, like I always have to be right and they're always wrong, or I'm always wrong and everybody else is always right. Or even this like black and white of people are either good or bad. They're not in between. Mm-hmm. Or I am always bad and everyone else is always good. I am always at fault. No one else is at fault, right? Like taking on full responsibility, or like these responses of like, I am always to blame and nobody else is, right? I am always the one. So again, a lot of always, nevers, those are type of black and white thinking that, like I said, are not always a trauma response, but are often a nervous system response. And then we get to decide when we're not in trauma, we can kind of see those coming up and we have the ability to be like, to have ands and boths and be like, well, like for the good and bad, like, well, that's not actually true. These people are not always good and they're not always bad. I can see how there's more nuance to it. There's more available to this, or things are not always this way, or things never happen. Like I can see that there's more available to me. That's where like our nervous system will offer us something. And then our prefrontal cortex is able to come online and offer us more perspective, more ability, more for learning. But when our trauma comes in is when like, oh no, it is safe to only believe this. Like there is no other way to think about this. There's no wiggle room. That's when we know it's a trauma response. They're seeking to keep us safe, and it doesn't allow us to learn. So that's why trauma is not great to have in our body all the time, because it inhibits our ability to learn and to grow, because we're just stuck in these little small spaces of understanding.
Mm-hmm. So you would say that like black and white thinking is a sign of trauma, because it's like it is our body trying to keep us safe in that black and white space. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So when we find that can only think about safety, when we have fear associated with it, that's when we know that there is possibly a trauma response connected to the black and white thinking.
Okay. Okay. There's 3 words that I've heard you say a couple times: fight, fawn, and flee. And I think most of us can understand what those are, but in case anybody listening doesn't know what they are, we'll link. We talked about that in our last episode. So we'll make sure that we link to those. You guys should listen to those, so that we don't have to double back on them.
Right.
But I think it's important for you to recognize what those are. So, okay,
Yeah,
we're part, those people listening here, for most of us, we're all members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we do come from this place of a lot of black and white thinking.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the place that we want to be, but I think it's just kind of the way we've talked about things. It's the way we've been raised. And so how can black and white thinking trauma look in the church, specifically within, I would say, maybe the leadership of the church? And I want to be clear, like I'm not poking holes or saying anything like this is bad, but I do think that it's good to be aware of it, because it can be a problem for people. So
absolutely. Anyway. Yeah. It can be a problem for the leaders themselves being able to actually see other people and hear them, and a problem for like the people who their leaders are only in black and white and aren't willing to like look at the nuances and able to view them possibly differently than what they have in their mind. Right.
Right.
So I think a lot of like the black and white that you're saying that is not as helpful, especially in leadership. And I think it can go for parenting or just other people as well. But just like when we get into these blanket statements, right? The all or nothing, a black or white statement of like, so for instance, like if people are leaving the church or not as active, right? We have kind of like these set reasons that we know why. And so it's kind of like this blank statement of, well, this is why, and I had one of my friends like just comment, like, we're not Satan following heathens. If we decide to do something different, whether we are stepping back a little bit or we've completely left, like just really recognizing like there's more nuance to it. It's not about just these people want to leave to sin and
or they've been deceived, right? I think that's one deceived. That I think we hear a lot, like they've just been deceived, or you've let yourself be deceived, sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah. And so just starting to recognize when we notice a blanket statement like that, something that's like either or, to be able to like, specifically as a leader, right? To be able to say like, okay, if I am having this come up in me, that means that we want to automatically project it onto them. We want to like fix them. We want to like, and it's coming from a good place of like, we're worried about them, this and that and the other, what does this mean for their future, their exaltation, because it's something we believe in so strongly. And like, if that's all we can focus on, it's just the black and white. We just see all or nothing. We just see the good and the bad, right? And so being able to then take a step, and what it is for a moment, we need to let go of our focus on them and shine on ourselves and figure out, why is it that I can only see black and white about this person? Because we know that the Savior, like for me, one thing I like to remember, like the only black and white that I really want to keep is that the Savior and my heavenly parents love me, and that I don't think that there's anything else. Like 100%, they love me or they don't, and they love me. right?
Right.
And nothing's going to change that. And the Savior then would do that. He would love and then be able to see the nuances of people. So when we're so black and white of, well, I think that they're doing this and this and this, we can't see them. We can't love them. We can't question from a place of like, I want to see you. We question from a place of judgment already.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's super powerful in leadership to notice when we ourselves are feeling the black and white and to assess within ourselves why that might be the case.
Yeah.
And then also like when you are, a member of the church and you have leadership that is seeming to be so black and white, can we see why that would be triggering something in us? And is it triggering black and whiteness in me, myself? Is it me not being able to like get like, oh, I see that they're black and white. And do I want to talk to them about that and offer and be knowable? Do I want to see about how that triggers the black and white in me and how I'm mad about it? Like really just kind of offer space for all of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I am sitting here thinking about some work that I have recently done with a coach, and this may be completely off, but for whatever reason, it feels like something to bring up right now. But I have noticed like there's two parts of me. There's this part of me that's completely understands when people need to step away and people are hurt or confused. I completely understand. But then I've noticed that there's this piece of me also that feels some judgment, and I have judgment that I feel that judgment, right? Because
Right.
I don't want to feel that. But I've been working with my coach recently, and she really helped me see that actually, I don't think I really like the judgment is a feeling that's, I think it's been masking something else. Like it's easier for me to feel that, but what's really underneath it is grief. Because I like feel like if people are leaving, then they're leaving me. They're like leaving a community that, and like we're not going to be on the same page or something. And so that's been so helpful for me in kind of being able to release some of that judgment, is to just be like, it's actually not judgment. It's actually like some intense grief that I really have sadness over, because I'm not judging their choices. I'm just sad because I'm afraid they're leaving me. I'm afraid they're leaving something that, that puts some commonality with us.
Yes.
So anyway, I don't know if that is helpful at all or even means anything in this trauma regard, but I just
I think it really does. Yeah, I think it does, because it highlights how the nervous system, black and white, is helpful for us in coming online, letting us say, like for you, like you could see there was this black and white, this judgment of this. And it wasn't a trauma response necessarily, because it gave you space for learning.
Yeah.
Right. It gave you space to be able to see what was underneath that. And so that's when it's helpful. The nervous system comes online like black and white, and we get to say, do I really need this? Do I want this black and white? But when we feel like it comes up over and over again and it just keeps happening and we feel like we can't get a handle on it, that's when possibly underneath there, some of the layers that you would uncover would be some form of trauma that is underneath there. Like something that it is triggering some past trauma from somewhere that just keeps resurfacing. And so if all we do is keep thinking the black and white, that's when it becomes a trauma response, because it's coping us away from healing that trauma.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think that's a really helpful explanation there. And hopefully somebody listening is like that. I mean, obviously somebody who's listening is going to resonate with that same thing, is going to, I just appreciate that explanation there, because I think that for me is really helpful.
Yeah.
So
for sure.
we know, like we talk about this in a church setting, right? But how can it look in a parenting and a societal, like in those interactions?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of just starting to recognize with our kids when we're parenting, if they will offer things like, again, you never, you always, right? And then we start to get this, like, how dare they? None of us ever, never, and always. And, and starting to recognize like what comes up again with this body response. Does it seem a little too much? Or are we kind of apathetic of like, whatever, you're right. Yeah, I always, never, life isn't fair, blah, 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 blah. Right. If we aren't able to get into a space of like, tell me more. Can I see my kid? Can I like know that they're feeling some emotion about this? And can I let them have this emotion? That's kind of how we know, again, that the nervous system has come online And if we aren't able to let them, that there could be some possible trauma, right? And maybe some of that's from like, I have to do it exactly right. I have to get this perfect. Again, that black and white of I'm either the perfect parent or I'm not, right? I'm making mistakes or I'm not. And be able to see like that's when we can get out of the black and white of like, yeah, I'm not going to be a perfect parent all the time. And I'm not always going to be able to see my kid. But when we like are not able to even get to that space is when we can start to see like, oh, my kids are triggering my trauma and my kids. And then what we do then is kind of create more bedrock, depending on where their body is, for a space for something traumatic to happen to them, of them not being seen by their parents and developmental stuff like that. So does that answer your question or help at all?
Totally does. I don't know. I can just sit here and think of all the places that I'm like, yep, black and white there, black and white there. I have noticed it ease up a little bit over the years as I have done a lot of work in trying to be more intentional about what I choose to think and believe. So I do think it is so helpful to be aware of it and then to be able to even have help in doing so, right? Like so much of my work has advanced when I've worked with a coach or with somebody to help me see those things. So,
and it is so helpful because we can't see those things in ourselves. And so it is so powerful to have somebody from the outside kind of offer a new way of viewing it and even noticing, hey, you're doing this pattern. So 100%.
So is it fair to say that as we work through our trauma and as we start to deal with it and learn some tools to work with it and process it, that we will have less black and white thinking in our lives?
Yes. We notice that we're black and white, or like, oh, I'm finding that I'm reverting back to that black and white, like what you were saying. Mm-hmm. Just the fact that we have the ability to notice that shows us that we've come out of it at times, right? It shows us that we're not in our nervous system all the time and in a trauma nervous system all the time, right? Like, so the fact that we're coming in and out lets us know our nervous system is getting healthy in the space of we can be there when it's needed and we can come out. And like, even in trauma of being like, I don't feel the pull to that so much anymore. Mm-hmm. And so knowing that, it gets less and less, even if it still happens, it gets like, we're able to see it, be aware of it, get out of it faster. Right? All of that is 100% true. And so part of it is just the awareness of knowing that that is what this black and white thinking is causing for me, and knowing that each person is different and we are really the only ones who know. That's why I love to do coaching and do one-on-one, is be able to really help somebody see what's going on in their body. Because even like something that they say could maybe have in my past totally been traumatic and caused this response in my body. And for them, it doesn't cause anything, or their trauma responses and state was totally different than mine, right? So each person, it really does come to like, what is happening in my body as to whether we will know.
Okay. And then what would you say we are striving for then? Like, we are trying to loosen up that black and white thinking. What type of thinking do we want to have as a church, as a person, as a society, as a parent, like where are we working to be?
Yes. So I love, again, just you saying that reminds me of my conversation with Meg before. And I will just quote her. Like, she's like, oh, so it's like an abundance of curiosity, of being able to see people. And I think that's what it is. Like in the church, there's lots of obvious needs that it's easy to go help somebody with a physical need, this and that and the other. Sometimes it's easy. We're not afraid to do that, right? But sometimes it is scarier for us when people are stepping away or being able to just take a break a little bit from maybe so much activity. And we're a little bit afraid to like go and see what's going on. And I think that is where we as a church, I think, are starting to change a little bit in that, because in all honesty, of us being afraid to go and talk to them is actually a nervous system response. We're actually fleeing and running away, right? And so being able to say like, no, I'm not going to run away. It's not needed right now. And even to be able to be like, you know what? I don't understand. I don't think the same way that you are, and being willing to be vulnerable with that, of like coming to somebody and saying, I really just want to understand, and I know that's different than the Savior, because he already understood the nuances of people because he was the Savior. Right. And so us as humans, then I think it's powerful for us to take responsibility and own our part of like, I don't get this, but I want to because I love you and I want to love you more by being able to understand what really is going on for you. So being able to really, that gives us ands both that stepping out of our nervous system that's all about survival and stepping into this space of love and what does love look like? And that we have so much choice around that. The black and white, we don't have choice around. It's one or the other. When we step into this, there's a myriad of abundance of choices that we can make and what that would look like.
I really appreciate that you just pointed that out, that we actually don't have a choice in black and white thinking, right? And it's funny because we like to think that we are really good at practicing our agency, but when we only give ourselves those two options, it is very limited, right? Yes. But if we can look at all the other choices we have, we really get to step into practicing a whole abundance of agency.
Yes. Yes.
I love that. Okay. So for some people listening, we're going to kind of take this full circle right here, but for some people listening, and for many of us, actually, coming out of black and white thinking can be traumatic in and of itself, which I think is so it's funny to think about that, right? Because like we're trying not to think black and white, and sometimes we think black and white because of a trauma response, but yet coming out of that sort of thinking can cause trauma too. So that's 100%, fun.
100%, right? Yeah. And I think it is just starting to like, because to your point, there has been so much safety in this black and white. So then when we start to step out and be like, oh, wait a minute, especially like if we're thinking along the lines of like one of the narratives that would come to mind for me is like, if you do X, Y, and Z, then you will be blessed. And, that's very black and white. But when all of a sudden we start to realize, oh, wait, so it's not about actually I do the thing and then I get the blessing. It's about the learning that's involved. It can then be, hold on a minute. Now I'm feeling betrayed because now all these things that I did, I didn't get that blessing. And hold on a minute. All my life has been functioning from this. And then we start to remember all these instances where we did X and Y and we didn't get the promised blessing. And that can be like this domino effect of like, hold on, so much trauma there. And then when we go to church and we hear people say those things, we get triggered. And it can be very, very traumatic, right? And then it could also be like, again, we're starting to see this black and white. And now all of a sudden there's maybe some new ways to look at it. So, okay, so maybe it's not around like, I follow this rule, I get this blessing. Now, it's about like love and about figuring out, and that sounds like a good thing, but it can be traumatic when we're like, but wait a minute, like that wasn't my result. How come I didn't get that? What was wrong with me that didn't happen? And then again, some of our old wounds will kind of come up, and what they do is they like compound. So like a trauma will compound upon another trauma. And they just start to kind of like enmesh into one. Does that make sense? So like all these wounds and traumas from the past of like, I'm not good enough and I'm not worthy, all of a sudden now bound onto this one thing of like, wait, black and white isn't a thing anymore. And that becomes what we think is the stem of that trauma. Does that make sense?
It totally does. And I think what I notice happening for me, and like I'm not going to say that it was a trauma response or is a trauma response, but what I do notice in that cycle for me, because I've been there, like coming out of that black and white thinking, especially within my church views, has been traumatic, I would say, to some extent in relearning that. But where I see it coming up again is now when I am in church now and I hear somebody speaking those things that I no longer necessarily quote unquote believe, right? Like they're speaking in those black and white terms. Right. I have this anger that comes up in me that I am having to now work through that. So I think I'm seeing it in the same way, just a little 100%. Bit. Oh, anyway.
Yeah.
We should probably, I guess I probably need to do some work with you.
I would love to help.
And in all seriousness though, too, like it is something that's probably there for people that we don't even recognize, right? Because somebody sitting in church or somebody who knows me would be very surprised probably to hear me say that. Because I have done a lot of this work very quietly.
Yes.
And I just think it goes to show that we really do need to be sensitive to people around us and to be kind and open-minded and really seek for love and acceptance rather than just thinking that everything has to be one particular way.
Yes, for sure. And I do think that, like I said, not every black and white is traumatic, right? And so again, knowing
Yes, absolutely.
we can hold on to certain black and whites that do serve us and do help us, and know that again, but the way to then in interacting with other people, of being able to be like, I'm holding on to this and this serves me, and I can see that it's not serving you. And it doesn't mean that I'm right and you're wrong, right? But being able to then give us a space for love in that of and I want to see you and I want to know why it's not working for you. Are you willing to share with me? Are you willing to, and maybe the person isn't, but it opens up space within ourselves to know that that's a possibility and that's okay. And I can see these people, even though we're not the same. And I think that is the beautiful part.
Yeah. And that it's a safe place, right? Because I think you are exactly saying some of those things that has kept me keeping all of those things and a lot of things inside, because I know if I was to have that conversation with somebody, I shouldn't say I know, because that's a black and white thinking too, right there. I am perceiving that if I had that conversation with somebody, that they most likely would not necessarily see it from my view, because they seem very content with viewing it the way that they already view it.
Right.
And so then my way would probably be perceived as, just way out there, or she's going off the deep end sort of thing.
Off the rails. There she goes.
Off the rails. There she goes. So it is, I love how you said that. It's just so important for us to be open-minded and to be respectful of, and recognize that what affects us a certain way is not affecting somebody else the same way, or how we think about something is not exactly the same way that somebody else thinks about something, because we all have different things that we value, different experiences that we've been through in our life, different things that are going to cause us to react and feel and think in different ways.
Yes. Yes. And all of that you mentioned is not black and white, right? That is very abundant and so many ands and boths that I think is what I see God all about, wanting to offer that to us. So,
well, thank you so much. Obviously, this is a conversation that was good for me and one that I probably still need to continue having, but I know that people listening will want to know where they can find more of you.
Yeah.
Where can they find you?
Yes, for sure. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook, just as Cami Birdo Coaching, and I'm getting a little bit on LinkedIn. Same with that. And then I have my website is camibirdno.com. I have a podcast that's Go All In to Let Go. And that's the title of my programs that I have. I have 2 programs that are 16 weeks long that are helping people figure out this trauma response in their body and embodiment and all that. So I have a basic foundation and then an embodied deep dive. So for people to go further, but yeah. Oh, and then I also do embodiment sessions that people, if all they want to do is just kind of figure out a little bit more about their body, I do those for clients as well. So
awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for having this conversation with me and
opening
our eyes up to that black and white thinking and where it can keep us stuck and where it could at sometimes be helpful. But
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
Everybody. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you again next week. Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.